Hey, what's up, everybody? My name is Jeremy Schumacher. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist. I'm the Jer in Wellness with Jer. Thanks for stopping by and checking out my channel today. Today we have a different setup. I'm not in the frog room. For those of you who followed the channel for a while, there's my old posters from my old office. Trying a different setup, different lights, the whole shebang for a very important video, part 3 of our 3-part series on who's the worst 3 therapists of all time. And we're finally to number 1. I was kind of reflecting on this. I've been avoiding it for a while for reasons that I'll get into. But I was kind of reflecting on how I would feel about the list. I think it's backwards 20 years from now. I think it would number 1 would be number 3 because I think impact is different. Whereas I could say Freud did some good by creating the field of psychotherapy, and therefore all the good that's been done can lightly be attributed to him. He also did more harm than good, in my opinion, which got him on the list. And Dr. Phil also maybe at least normalized therapy a little bit, tiny bit, and did some good. This person I put on the list as number 1 for just doing harm across the board, and having no redeeming qualities, but I think historically it'll look back and it'll flip-flop as Freud will be the character who remains big in the field of psychology, whereas Dr. Phil, who is number 2 on our list and number 1 on our list, will hopefully have faded into some level of obscurity. So, without further ado, who's number 1 on the list? Who's the number 1 worst therapist of all time, in my opinion, given this current moment? Jordan Peterson. Some of this is personal bias because people often hear him talk, or they'll see a snippet, a brief part of a speech. He's great in clips and therefore very popular on the internet in just clipped material. So people will send me little clips and be like, do you know this guy? I'm like, yeah, he's awful. So some of it's personal bias on my end because, like, people share him often or like, he talks smart and you talk smart. Do you like him? No, I don't like him. So, what makes him the worst? Well, like the other people on the list, he does really bad research and science. And so, not looking at how he talks, which we'll get into, but his writings are poorly done, and they're done based on poor science. So his 12 Rules for Life, his first big book, it was his second book, but his first one so unwieldy and hard to read that it wasn't very popular. So this was his big self-help book that was immensely popular, that helped put him on the map. And it's just not based on anything. It's based on his personal understanding of things as like a social commentator, not as a psychologist. The research that's in it is done poorly, and the way that he cites the research that's done is poor. He bases all of this off of like lobster data that he didn't understand and misinterpreted and then built a whole thing out of. He likes lobsters. And again, I'm not going to try and do a huge takedown. There's the YouTube channel, Some More News, has like a 3-hour video about him. I think Philosophy Tube has like an hour-long video of him. So I'm not going to get into like why he's wrong. He does a bunch of bad science is how I'm going to summarize it. As a therapist, he misuses science on the regular in a way that can't be unintentional. It's not that he didn't know better and whoops-a-daisies. It's that he was wrong, it was pointed out to him, and he's since doubled down, tripled down, quadrupled down, whatever he's on, selling out and losing his license. So this video almost got canceled altogether because he recently lost his license. He appealed it and still lost his license. So he's no longer a psychologist. So he's not a therapist. He's not legally allowed to practice therapy. I guess I'm pretty skeptical of what his therapy practice looked like since 2016, 2017 when he got popular anyways. I'm not sure how many people he was seeing. And I'm going to guess he did poor therapy. I'm going to guess in the same way that he was as a professor, which was very engaging to listen to and maybe sounded profound from time to time, but actually was kind of meaningless and just full of hot air. He's like a maybe we'll cut to it here if I can figure out the technology. He's a podcaster who uses all these big words, but he doesn't know what they mean. And that's kind of his approach to psychology. And if you hear him talk in any different setting, he'll say, oh, I was a biologist for years. Oh, I've been a neuroscientist for years. Oh, I was a researcher. Oh, I'm a therapist. He tries to wear all these different hats that when we look at his academic credentials, we know he doesn't have the backing. And somebody could say, well, Jerry, you talk about all these different things you do. Right, like I am a licensed marriage and family therapist, I am a certified religious trauma specialist, and I have sports performance background through lived experience as an athlete and a coach. That's not a formal part of my training, but I have a lot of lived experience. So again, could he have some of these things? Sure, but he's up to like 15 different professions that he claims to be an expert in, and that's just instantly skeptical. I'm very ADHD, and I have three totally disconnected things over 15 years in my career. That's kind of possible. It's possible when you throw ADHD into the mix because my brain moves very fast, and for a lot of people who have ADHD, they'll have life's histories like this. I'm trying to blank on who his name is, but the famous pitcher who like left a game to go cut down a tree and then saved someone's life, who like had a broken bone, and he just was like this world-renowned athlete and also could not be bothered to focus on the sport of baseball. So ADHD kind of works like that, but Jordan Peterson, as far as I know, is neurotypical. Jordan Peterson, in his writing, is super neurotypical, so I'm going to comfortably say he's not ADHD. So 12 rules of life are like stand up straight, keep your room clean, like very basic kind of shallow level self-help type stuff that then he uses to kind of pontificate in between and tell some stories. His stories about like clients and stuff are also kind of unbelievable, where I would say either they're for sure like amalgamations of clients that he talks about to prove the points he's trying to prove in his book, or they're just totally fabricated, which seems more likely. And again, I have not been a huge follower of his career. The first person years ago who brought him up to me was shortly after that book came out, and in a quick skim of it, I was pretty skeptical that this guy knew what he was talking about. He uses word salad a lot. Two things that you can watch a Jordan Peterson video and kind of highlight are his use of the word fundamentally and functionally. He kind of uses them interchangeably, and they're a catch-all for when he's wrong. Like, you can just interpret it that he's saying something that's false when he uses those words, because he's trying to sidestep facts or data to just prove his point. And we'll get into why he does that a little bit. He does psychoanalysis. He's a big fan of Carl Jung and the work that Jung did. And Jung was just super unscientific, in the same reasons that I complained about Freud as being non-scientific, as being pseudoscience. So were Freud's big students, and that includes Carl Jung. Carl Jung worked with Freud for a while. He was a student of Freud's, and then he left and did his own thing. And like, his work is hogwash. It just hasn't held up to any sort of scientific standard. It's great for literary analysis. The shadow. Ooh, we all have a shadow. And doing shadow work and stuff like that, like, that's fine. It's fine as a character study, as a literary criticism, as a way to help somebody who's struggling with mental health. Not fine. So Jordan Peterson loves these archetypes from Jung, and he likes the literary criticism. And I think it makes sense when you kind of go back in Jordan Peterson's history, which, like, the marriage and family therapist in me is like, let's look at his family tree. But he studied English and political science before he studied psychology. So his initial degree is in political science, and he studied English. He didn't get a degree in English, as far as I know. And then he went back to school later and studied psychology. So, like, when you think in terms of political science and an English major, like, his love of Jung makes sense. But as a therapist, like, we shouldn't be practicing psychoanalysis from Carl Jung. Like, it's never held up to any sort of scientific criticism, and it's just not a scientific way of doing things. It's very much therapist as expert, which Jordan Peterson loves, and it's horoscope levels of analysis. It's being able to take these kind of broad literary type archetypes, these character tropes, and being able to apply them in someone's life. And like, I, as a young therapist, did some narrative therapy. It's about authoring your own story, and it's about using narrative techniques, storytelling techniques, to help people. So again, like, can I see where he used these archetypes, where he took Jung's work and was helpful? Sure. Is the reason he's such a, like, wild and obvious hypocrite because these things don't actually work? Yeah, exactly. Like, his life is a shambles and has been for a while. because he doesn't listen to his own advice, and because his advice is so basic that it doesn't actually lead to any sort of growth. He's a conservative at heart. He's interested in what he experienced growing up in the 1960s in Canada. He's not interested in growth or progress. And he hates being called a right winger, even though he's so obviously conservative, which is what the right wing is all about. So he's not about growth and progress. He's about maintaining the status quo. He uses bad science, the lobster thing, to say there are these hierarchies. They're natural in the world. Like, not to get into it. And the reason I've put off this video for so long is because I hate talking about Jordan Peterson, because like he has no redeeming qualities. There's nothing about his work that is worth studying or digging into. And he puts out so much content. It's like that fire hose of lies type. It's not a metaphor. It's a logical fallacy where people talk so much and say so much false stuff, it takes more time to prove the accurate, truthful things based on evidence. And by that time, he said more inflammatory things to stay in the headlines and try and stay relevant than is worthwhile to debunk. But the whole lobster thing is based on him not understanding anything about animal biology, misreading the data that was in the study that he cited, and just slapping any sort of research onto a conservative mindset. He wants to say there are hierarchies and they're natural, and so he uses lobsters as his evidence, and it's wrong. Like, the study was wrong. It's people, all the alpha male influencers, Andrew Tate, who I think maybe dated Jordan Peterson's daughter for a while. So, like, again, these manosphere grifter types sticking together. But it's the alpha male thing is also wrong. Like, that's based on some biologist once upon a time who studied wolves and wrote this paper on alpha males, and this idea has perpetuated in society, but it's false. Like, we know that's not how wolves socialize, and even if it were, it wouldn't necessarily translate one-to-one for humans. That's looking at mammals, which is not what Jordan Peterson did. Jordan Peterson's not even in the same animal kingdom or the same world of animals, because he's talking about invertebrates versus vertebrates, which are just totally different creatures. And so he couldn't have picked probably a worse animal to use for human psychology than a lobster. That invertebrate-vertebrate difference in how our brains are processed and how our systems communicate to each other in our bodies, totally different. And so him trying to say, like, oh, lobsters' posture is about hierarchy and about dominance, like, he's wrong about that. That's false. And that's not how humans work anyways. So, like, applying what a lobster would do to a human is not a worthwhile experience. We can look at our close ancestors. We can look at chimps. We can look at primates. We can look at mammals. We can look at all these things and know that we're getting varying degrees of difference each level we go. So, like, mammals in general are not all primates. We're primates. Human beings are primates. And so we can look at other primates and say, hey, this isn't a one-to-one comparison. This is still apples to oranges, but at least we're talking about fruits. And his analogies with lobsters and trying to suggest that's a basic part of human biology and something we evolved, like, it is incorrect. I don't know. That's apples and coal. You know, like, I don't. It's so far removed from anything that's useful. It's not a useful analogy, and certainly not a basis for scientific thinking. So one thing to make an analogy or use a metaphor to try and create some understanding, but, like, to base your entire self-help book on this concept that is incorrect is just bad science. And again, science moves around, right? His first book, Maps of Meaning, was published in 1999, I believe. So it's one of those things where, like, hey, I'm open to science progressing, to us having new learning and new understandings, and then, like, correct your work. Right? Like, if you publish a study and it passes peer review, and then someone publishes something a couple years later and says this was incorrect, like, science, the scientific method, the way it's supposed to work, then would update the knowledge around it. And he just doesn't do that. He just doubles down, and he he continues to sell his book. He continues to kind of propagate all these things. Where he really got famous was being transphobic. honestly, like he's a bigot and he's been on the right wing grift cycle since then. He didn't want to use people's preferred pronouns, and he got mad about it and he wrote about it. And so like that's really where he's been all his career at this point. When this is going to come out in 2023, I believe he's just working for right wing media. So again, like laughable for him to claim to not be a right winger when he's paid handsomely by the right wing media machine. He's just part of the propaganda at this time, and it's just all false outrage. But it's like this whole political correctness thing. He's Canadian, so it was all about how he's going to lose his job for not using proper pronouns, and like that's never happened. Like that claim, that false victimization that he's wanting to play the victim role is just incorrect. He didn't lose his job for that. He lost his job for refusing to follow standards of conduct within his profession and by his employer, which like that's allowed, right? It's not. It wasn't because of his belief system. It's because he broke rules and then refused to adjust, and he was given opportunity over and over and over again to adjust. So like his weird political correctness thing is this false victimization thing. He claims to hate identity politics, but that's all he spends time doing now. And again, I think Jordan Peterson in 2023 is different than Jordan Peterson in 2016. But the grift has been there this whole time. He speaks about Disney movies and he talks about the Bible a lot. Like he's a gifted storyteller. He understands the idea of like preaching and proselytizing. That's what he's interested in. I think he likes being a professor for that reason, and I think he was a bad researcher and no one ever held him accountable, so he kind of just got away with being involved in it for a while. And he's one of those people who struggles to see that he doesn't know what he's talking about, and so he just kind of keeps going and going and going and going. One of the things he hates is neo-Marxism, phrase he likes to talk about. And like most Americans don't have a good concept of what that means. Most Americans will conflate socialism and communism, and those are two totally different schools of thought. Those are two different ways to organize society. And so again, like just this boogeyman nature of it, he's telling stories, he's not doing any science. So like as a therapist, I detest that. That's what Dr. Phil got on the list for. That's what Freud got on the list for, is being bad at science. Psychology has a bad enough reputation as it is as a soft science, that to have people in the field who are bad at doing the science of it harm the field as a whole. And so that's really problematic, first and foremost, besides Jordan Peterson being a bigot and being hateful and just being a garbage human being, and being a hypocrite, which, like, I don't know, let's throw shade where shade is due. Like, that's pretty common on the right-wing side of things. Like, hypocrisy is, at this point, a feature, not a flaw. But yeah, so his whole thing around like political correctness, again, like pronouns are not a harmful thing. No one should be going into the locker room to check kids' genitals. Like, that's not a necessary thing. If you're not their parent or you're not their doctor, their assigned sex at birth isn't your business, right? And as a professor, as somebody who's been a professor, I've taught multiple college classes, I've been an instructor at that level, I've been employed in higher ed, spent years working in higher ed. Like, it is not necessary to know someone's birth name or birth gender. You don't even get that information. You just like get a class roster that has pretty little information. So unless you're digging into a certain kid, which like why, there's no reason to know that stuff. If a kid says I'd like to be called Joe, you just call him Joe. If they want to be Joseph or Josephine, it doesn't matter. Like, that's just what you call them. First day of class, you do attendance and people tell you what name they like, and that's what you use. It's not an issue, and it's not about political correctness. It's not about identity stuff. It's just like they're here to learn from you, and it doesn't really matter. So anyway, like that whole thing is weird as somebody who has an insight into being a professor at a time when he got popular and was giving large lectures. There's no way he was spending the time to get to know all of his students. I've seen videotape lectures of where I think he was at University of Toronto and he had much smaller class size. Again, like you get to know your students a little bit, but it's one of those things where like you just have a class roster, and if they tell you they want to use a certain name, you just use that name. It's not a problem, and it's certainly not taking away his rights at all. Like, it's not an attack on his belief system that people exist and they want to be called something. It's not harmful. It's not disruptive. It's not interrupting the learning process at all, and it would have nothing to do with the classes that he was teaching. So, I don't know. He's just a grifter, and he's bad at science. He's also, like, a bad speaker. And one of the things that I detest about like his rise to fame is a lot of people being like, well, he's a gifted speaker, he sounds smart. And one of the criticisms that's leveled against him, which is accurate, is like he's sounds smart, but he's not smart. He does not say anything. So back to my initial point, neo-Marxism and postmodernism. He hates postmodernism because he does not understand it. Because what happens with Jordan Peterson constantly is he falls into like all these fallacies around postmodernism. If he liked postmodernism but was bad at it, that's how he debates. So he often is like, well, what does that word mean? He denied climate change based on not being able to understand like environment, not being able to understand the basic meaning of things, and then he wants to debate the meaning of every single word. So like he just did a debate with Matt Dillahunty not that long ago, which like went poorly for him. We won't see him debate Matt Dillahunty anymore because he lost the debate. But he wants to like debate a word like wellness when like we're talking about like, I don't know, they were talking about losing your head, getting decapitated, and like he was trying to question like the wellness of somebody who's losing their head, and Matt Dillahunty's just like, it's bad for your wellness to not have your head connected to your body anymore. Like, why are you debating this? But that's what he gets into, where like this postmodern, the false criticism of postmodernism is that nothing means anything. Like he rails against nihilism, and then he constantly falls into these logical fallacies around nihilism. Like, well, if this word doesn't mean what I think it means, then words can't mean anything at all. And like, that's not at all what postmodernism is about. It's just saying that these things are relative, and that therefore, based on where you're at relative to your current situation, different things might mean different things to different people. Like, there's a context, and the context matters. That's not crazy. Comes out of Einstein's theory of relativity. So, I don't know. He gets into moral relativism then, and then he wants to, like, be like, I am a Christian, but I don't believe in God, or something. And again, so, like, trying to get him hammer down on any one point is next to impossible because his word salad is so ridiculous. He just talks and talks and talks in circles to the point where you can have mashups of him debating himself because he's not making any coherent point against anything other than maybe wokeness now, because whatever. But like when he gets into a debate, he's not taking those stances, which is how he kind of maintains a little bit of saying that, like, well, I'm not right wing, because he doesn't always take the right wing stance, but it's where he lands. It's just that he talks in circles so much. It doesn't make sense. He's interested in hierarchies. He's interested in having set authority. He's one of those weird people who like collects Nazi stuff, which like is a red flag, you know. You don't need to collect Nazi stuff. Nazis were bad. You don't need to study them every single day to make sure we don't repeat their stuff. And so, like, again, it's just something that he absorbs, and then he can't see that, like, he's kind of a fascist about stuff. He promotes authoritarian control, like fascism, our way or the highway. Like, my ideas are the only ideas you can have, or you're a bad person. Like, that's the hierarchies he gets back to. He's misogynistic. His daughter sometimes calls him out, but then continues to work with him because she's a grifter too. She's like a wellness influencer. So I don't know. Jordan Peterson's been depressed his whole life, and I have like a lot of grace for people with mental health issues, but that also highlights a lot of the hypocrisy around like his rules don't work, his self-help doesn't work. He got addicted to like barbiturates and then couldn't handle the withdrawal symptoms, so he went to Russia and was put in a medical coma so that he could come out of it. Like again, like get your house in order before you criticize other people is one of his rules. And like you're out here hating on women and trans people and gay people and any other marginalized group, and you're addicted to drugs because you can't handle your depression. Like, and that's not picking on people who are depressed. Like, I have so much space for people who have mental health issues. I'm a mental health professional. And yet, the ability for people to say, hey, I need help, versus let me tell you what's wrong with your life because my way is correct, world of difference. I have so much grace for people who are willing to come into therapy and say, hey, I need help. That was a thing that I struggled with for a long time, finding a therapist who was a good fit for me, because it was me not admitting that I need help. The first time I went to therapy, I told my therapist what diagnosis I needed to get. Not that I needed to get it, but it was for my ADHD. Because it was like, I already know I have it. Just let's run some tests here. But I was a bad client, and I own that I was a bad client at that point. And therapy wasn't particularly useful for me at that point because I wasn't actually asking for help in a way that would have created growth or stimulated any sort of development for me. So again, like, he's just the worst kind of therapist. He's doing bad therapy because he's drawing from a school of thought that's been debunked. He's moved into the grifting space, and like, therapists should get paid, right? Like, so for a therapist to write a book is not a bad thing. I've got like 3 or 4 started because I have ADHD and I can't finish any of them. Um, but like, I'm not out here railing against people who are writing books or making money or going on talk shows and doing things. Like, if you're putting out good information, you want to help people. Like, if your book can help more people, if a podcast can help more people, if you can reach a wider audience by being on YouTube, like, I'm not railing against that. I'm just saying, like, there's a way to kind of say, hey, there's grifting in this that's available. Like, you're not really promoting therapy anymore. You're promoting your solution to life's problems. You're suggesting that if everyone follows your 12 steps, their life will be better. And, like, anybody who knows anything about psychology knows that cannot be true because there's way too much diversity in the world. Like, people are too diverse and situations are too diverse. Context matters. Postmodernism. So, yeah, there's like a way to do a self-help book that says, like, hey, if this helps you, great, and if not, there's other resources available. And then there's the self-help, like, I am a guru and follow my way or be lost. And that's always been the thing for him, is even when he was a professor, it was his way. He should have been a religious leader. He would have done well there, and people would have also ignored him as like a weird cult leader, because then like he could do his thing, my way or the highway, right or wrong thinking, and all these grifting things that he's doing to make money, which is what churches do, organized religion's doing. So like, great, fine, but then like, you're not pretending to be a therapist, you're not pretending to be a scientist. So yeah, even in prepping for this video, it was like watching too much of his stuff that I detest. He's got like that Kermit the Frog Canadian with rocks in his mouth voice, and everyone does like a bad impression of him, so I can do one. I've workshopped one, but I don't want to do that. He gets really weird. One of his early YouTube videos that I saw was talking about Pinocchio and the island of lost boys, and he starts crying about it. He's not my client. I'm opposed to diagnosing people who aren't your clients. That's why I do like comic book stuff and talk about fictional characters, because I don't mind diagnosing fictional characters. Don't want to diagnose real people who are not your clients. It's bad practice. So like, this is not me saying this is his specific diagnosis. I've never met the man. I've never worked with the man. So like, I don't know him at all. It would not surprise me if he had some sort of trauma in his life. One, because most people have trauma. I've written a blog called We All Have Trauma. But like, it's weird. Like, I'm interested in men. Like, hey, stop watching Jordan Peterson. Stop watching Andrew Tate. Don't watch Sneeko. Like, these guys are groomers and yucky and misogynistic. So, Gary Vee, all these manosphere type people. If you're not familiar with the manosphere, it's an aspect of the internet culture of like people who are trying to say like, men are lost, let's help men. Like, men aren't lost. The patriarchy still exists. Like, is there an epidemic of mental health across the board? Yes. Have men been swept up in that? Yes. Do I need to cry about like boys being lost? No. So like, I don't know, something probably happened earlier in his life where this idea of like lost boyhood makes him so sad, whether he was abused as a child or he's abused other people. Like, I don't know. There's some trauma somewhere in there. It's a weird response for someone who works in this field. Like, you can have feelings. Certain things can make you sad. The movie Onward, the first time I saw it, made me tear up a little bit because I've got 2 boys and my relationship with my brother is really tight. So like, brothers as a concept is very moving to me. I'm not demonizing someone having their feelings, but like, I can talk about brothers in therapy just fine. I don't have to tear up about it. Like, there's a difference between being moved by something and like being bothered by something. And like, he's bothered by it. He like couldn't see a client like that because you start tearing up about stuff like that, and like, then the therapy's not about you, or it's not about your client, it's about you because you're crying about their problems. Like, I don't know, I'm not trying to demonize people having feelings, but like there's a weirdness about it. As somebody who has all the space in the world for people who need help and people who are asking for help and people who get weird about all sorts of things, like I have a lot of space for this behavior, not from a professional who's claiming to be an expert and have his shit together. Like he doesn't have his shit together on this topic. So again, like I don't know, when I was still a religious person myself and went to church, like I had a pastor who used to cry whenever we would talk about like Jesus dying on the cross, and it was weird. It was off-putting. It was like, dude, like this is your job. How long are you going to keep crying about it? And like maybe that's some of my own like German Lutheran upbringing where like emotions are bad. But like I don't know, as a therapist, like I went to school with somebody who would cry whenever alcohol came up. Like alcohol, someone drinking alcohol. Like they grew up with an alcoholic parent. It was traumatic for them. I have so much space for that. And you can't go out into the wide world of therapy and work with people who might have alcohol problems if you're going to cry because of your own history. And like there's a way to be a therapist and say, hey, I don't see these clients. So it's not like that person shouldn't have been a therapist. It's just like you have to be aware that you can't work with certain things. Like I don't have any space in my heart or in my brain. We don't feel things in our heart. It's a thing I try and correct. I was raised religious, so you're taught that you feel things in your heart, which like that's false. But anyway, I'm off topic here. Um, I don't have any space for people who abuse animals. Like that's just a huge trigger for me. Like I love animals so much that it's very hard for me to hold any sort of space for people who are animal abusers. I've had it come up from time to time in session, and it's just not something that I tend to handle well. I don't start crying. Jordan Peterson, you weirdo. Um, in a therapy context, professional to professional, not judging him as a person, although he's a garbage person. He's put out enough stuff where we can judge his actions. Um, Super off topic here. But yeah, like I won't work with animal abuse. Like I don't want a teenager who gets caught by his parents sacrificing animals in the backyard or abusing the family pet. Like that's something that triggers me, and I don't think I can hold non-judgmental space for clients who are struggling with that. It has come up in a case or two over the years where it's been like, oh shit, like I'm having a response to this, and like I'm professional enough to keep that under wraps in session and then need to process it with my own support system, and then not continue to work with that client if it's going to be a thing that continues to come up. In the cases where it came up for me, it wasn't. It was a thing where I was able to seek out my own support and work with my support system, my supervisors, other colleagues, and work through it and keep the therapy focused on something that I could help the person with. But like that's not a thing that I'm interested in working with. I'm at a point in my career where I own my own practice. If that's what's coming through the door, I'm going to refer out. I'm going to say, hey, you need to see someone else for that. So like again, it's just like then when he's in the therapy space, like I can see all these ways in which it goes poorly. He's a gifted orator. He talks like a pastor, and so he's got like a certain cadence, and he can, again, he looks good in clips. If you're not watching a debate of his, he seems interesting and captivating in the way that like I think a lot of preachers are gifted orators, but they're not talking about anything that has any sort of meaning. They're not helping people. They're doing bad logic and bad philosophy and patching over a bunch of real life problems with philosophical or linguistic fallacies to try and make people feel better in the moment without having them do any sort of growth. So yeah, he would have been a fine religious leader if he had taken that route. And that's one of the criticisms leveled against him from his own colleagues. One of the people who worked with him was like, I can't support his work anymore. He wants to be a religious leader. He thinks he is spiritual for people. He thinks like his level of help is some sort of messiah god complex. So like there have been red flags throughout his career. Yeah, I put off this video because I don't like talking about it, and not like because I just don't like dealing with him. He's a negative across the board. There is no cost benefit analysis from like, well, at least this, like he's just bad. I'm guessing his therapy is bad. I'm guessing the way that he was trying to help people was not helpful, and the work that he's done in the public sphere has been harmful. Like he's promoting transphobia and homophobia and misogyny. He's pro-hierarchy, which in our modern times is patriarchy. Like, it's authoritarianism, and it's word salad dressed up as intellectualism, he's just a dummy. Like when you watch him talk in real time and debate with somebody, it's clear he doesn't know what he's talking about, and he has no frame of reference for being able to admit that, which is weird again in a profession like therapy, because we're taught we have a scope of practice. There are things that we can comment on, and there are things that we should not comment on because we don't know enough to comment on them. The other thing that was hard in prepping for this video is like I don't want to watch his stuff because it's painful. Like it's so bad when you can see what he's doing and you can see how he's grifting. It's hard. It's discouraging to scroll down in the comments and see people be like, "What a wise person! This guy saved my life. He's changed my life." Blah blah blah. When you're like, he didn't say anything. Like the words he said sounded smart, but he didn't say anything smart. He didn't have a point. He just talked in circles. So it's discouraging, it's disheartening to see like that from my profession, but also to see like people get caught up in it. Like he's kind of that cult of personality, which like Dr. Phil a little bit, and certainly Freud to a large extent in his career was that powerful personality. It is nice to see Jordan Peterson be like held to account. He's moved severely to the right. He's being paid by like talking Turning Point USA, or I don't know, one of those right wing propaganda machines. Like so that's where all his stuff is. He lost his license in Canada. He lost his professorship. So like there have been things where people have said like this guy is just hate filled and what he's saying is not based on science. His book should have been unpublished by now. Like, there's so much stuff out there, and he's faced so much criticism, and he's not owned or learned from any of it. He's just digging in, and then like grifting off of it. So even when he lost his license, it was like, sign up for my course. I almost did the voice. I will say, for people who are like, they want to hear my Jordan Peterson voice, I do an impression of my dad that is based very much off of like the early 2000s PA system. My dad's a teacher. He taught at the high school I went to. He used to have to do announcements over the PA system. It distorted his voice a little bit. It made him sound like Kermit the Frog. So I have an impression of my dad that's like Kermit the Frog-esque. I used to do it with my friends a lot in high school because it was funny at the time in context. And it's a little Jordan Peterson-y, so it takes a couple takes for me to find the right Jordan Peterson that's neither Kermit the Frog nor my dad. And so I don't want to do that on camera. What was I saying? I almost dipped into the I don't know. He's the false victimization of it all. He's just grifting off of it. So when he lost his license, it was like, take my courses and sign up for my stuff. Go buy my book. Follow me on this Rumble or whatever right wingers are using for social media. Like, it's just constant grift. Like, again, I support therapists getting paid. I like to get paid. If I ever can finish any of my books, it will be great to get a contract from that. So, and like, again, Jordan Peterson, like, I don't know why he went and debated Matt Dillahunty. Like, that was a bad idea. Matt Dillahunty is an atheist activist and is good at debating. And so Jordan Peterson has debated some other philosophers, and like he always looks like an idiot in those debates because he's not good in real time. He's not quick on his feet. He only has a couple prepared talking points, and if somebody's prepared for those talking points, he doesn't know what else to do. He's going to go back to lobsters and hierarchies, and if somebody can poke holes in those things, which are easy to poke holes in, he just starts saying like, oh, functionally. It's hard to not go into it. That's not even my full impression of him. I always use the Lost Boys idea to get into his voice. But like he starts saying functionally and fundamentally, and those words that I said like, hey, highlight those. Those are indicators that he's saying something false. He'd be a terrible poker player. So he's got these giveaways where he's using bad science. But like Zizek Zizek. He's a philosopher, famous philosopher. He runs circles around Jordan Peterson because Jordan Peterson doesn't know what he's talking about. Jordan Peterson can't even keep up in that debate. It's painful to watch. His Dillahunty one was really bad, but he's good. He understands the current modern media where he gets a YouTube team to clip that, and he gets that stuff shared in brief little bits. So like, oh, Jordan Peterson proves Matt Dillahunty wrong. Like that didn't happen. Watch the whole debate. It's just he's just counting on people not having the attention span to actually sit down and listen to him talk for an hour. And instead watch clips and the highlights where you can clip it where it doesn't sound so bad. And some of the things that he says, like not everything that comes out of his mouth is like pure garbage. Like being interested in men's issues isn't a bad thing. Being somebody who wants to say like, hey, men are lost. Okay, It's just then if you're like, I have the solution if you spend thousands of dollars on my books and podcasts and my, he had like a whole school. He's trying to start a school, but he had like an online program you could sign up for where you weren't working with him directly. Um, so like again, it's not actual care or concern about social issues. It's just how do I grift, and these are my targets for my snake oil. So Jordan Peterson is my least favorite. But again, as I kind of said at the top of the video, like looking back and reflecting on putting this list together, which kind of is, haphazard in my head, because I don't plan stuff out ahead of time. I would probably maybe say historically, like in the modern moment, I'm comfortable saying Jordan Peterson, worst therapist in our modern moment, Dr. Phil, and Freud, but like long term, Freud's going to be the one who stays on the list. The other two should go into obscurity in the way that, like, I don't know who was grifting in the 1980s. Pat Robertson, probably, right? Dude was super ancient by the time I knew I knew of him. Like, who were the big figures in the Satanic Panic? Like, I don't know, but I'm sure they were a big deal at the time. So hopefully Jordan Peterson, Dr. Phil fade into obscurity and don't remain. My concern with Jordan Peterson is, like, the right wing, the red pill crowd, the people who think Elon Musk is smart and listen to Joe Rogan every day are like hook, line, and sinker for him. He sounds so much smarter than Rogan. Like, Rogan at least has the wherewithal to say, like, once a month that he's an idiot. He should say every show, do not listen to my advice, I'm a moron. But it's one of those things where, like, that there's a group of people, I don't want to say a generation because not everyone's listening to him, but a group of people who are growing up listening to him and thinking he's full of good ideas. So, like, patriarchy, people, like, it's the conservative mindset. It's these talking points on the right wing ideological side of things, the right wing spectrum of things that are like, men are losing their places, and it's because of these frisky feminists and women getting paid equal pay. Like, it's misogyny wrapped up as intellectualism, and so there are people who hear these things and they're like, the incel culture, the red pill culture, the group of people who are like, we know better than everyone else, and they like spend all their time on the internet and they're super cringy and they don't know how to interact with people in the real world, and then they can't get dates and they're single and lonely and living in their parents' basement. And I'm not trying to be mean or like stereotype, but like, again, we're talking about a certain group of people who go from like playing D&D and LARPing, and like, I'm a big fan of D&D, I play D&D, to then like trying to join a right-wing militia. I don't know, it's in-group, out-group nonsense. But yeah, so like there's a whole group of people who are growing up and hearing Andrew Tate and being like, that guy makes sense, women need to know their places, and ignoring that Andrew Tate is like a sex offender, right? Like, he's in court for sex trafficking. That's problematic. Probably not somebody we should be taking advice from. Jordan Peterson turned to drugs to handle his depression. Probably not somebody we should be taking advice from unless it's like, hey, depression is hard, and I did drugs, and then couldn't kick them without medical-induced coma, so don't do drugs. Like, that would be a good talking point, I guess, instead of, like, wearing obnoxious suits and pretending like you have it all together. That's the other thing is, like, if you look at early Jordan Peterson stuff, like, dude's just kind of, like, shubbly. Is that the word I'm looking for? He's kind of, like, some sort of, like, shabby. He's like shabbily dressed. He like tucks in like his dress shirts, and he just like is dressed poorly. And like, look, I'm wearing a Golden Girls shirt, and a Hawaiian shirt. Like, I sweat all the time, so I wear Hawaiian shirts because they're breathable and it's hot out. Like, I'm not saying I'm like a fashion icon, but like, he's clearly playing a character. Like, he's trying to be some sort of 1950s intellectual by like doing the bow tie thing, and like the way he dresses now with like the three-piece suits and the vests. He's big on vests. He's been wearing a suit recently that's like his logo on a suit. It looks really terrible, and he feels great about it. So yeah, he's like, probably has like a pocket watch and pretends to smoke a cigar or a pipe to look smart. Like, he's just, I don't know, a stupid person's idea of an intellectual, and he plays into that. Like, he leans into it to keep the grift going. So he's not a smart person. He's lost his psychology jobs. He's lost his license. He's been held accountable pretty much across the board after having many opportunities to grow and fix things and choosing not to, and then claiming that he's the victim. He's just tiring. It's just tiresome to deal with that. And again, like, he's not the only one. So we have Andrew Tate, we have Elon Musk currently. Donald Trump does a lot of the same things. So, like, the entire right wing spectrum, at least in the United States, is all about this stuff. So, like, devoid of any sort of actual intellectual stances, no ideology, just flitting from culture war to culture war. And, like, again, that's not how he started out, although he rose to fame by being a transphobe. So, like, I guess that's been part of what he's always done. He's just really leaned into it as his other opportunities and jobs have dried up because he's lost them and alienated people by being a hateful bigot. So, just all the worst things a therapist could be. He's bigoted, he's anti-intellectual, he's not growing or learning, and he's bad at science. So all those things add up to worst therapist, Jordan Peterson. This concludes our list of 3 worst therapists of all time. At number 3, we had Sigmund Freud. At number 2, we had Phil McGraw, Dr. Phil McGraw. And at number 1, we had Jordan Peterson. He didn't lose his PhD, so I guess he's probably still Dr. Jordan Peterson, but that's not really how he goes. He doesn't go by that. Yeah, harmful to the field, bad scientist, bad at science, bad ideas for how to help people. Therefore, they're on the list. Worst therapists. I don't know that I'll do more lists. I thought it would make me, like, release a video regularly, but I just avoided wanting to do the video on Jordan Peterson. So that didn't really work. I'm not sure how many more lists we'll do. I have a list of songs to get to and some shows to review still. So I like that stuff, and that seems a little lighter fare, a little bit more fun. I don't have to do a 50-minute video about it. Some more news has like a 3-hour video. It's well done. The Philosophy Tube one. I think even Wisecrack has a video. So if you're like wanting to be on YouTube, FD Signifier has something on the Manosphere, and he talks about Jordan Peterson in that video, and Andrew Tate and Sneeko and those other people. So again, like, if you want to spend time on YouTube not watching me, which is understandable, and see people who are professional YouTubers put stuff together on these topics, like, it's out there. The criticisms of Jordan Peterson are out there. I'm just specifically looking at it from the therapy mindset of, like, this is what not to do as a therapist, and he checks a lot of those boxes. He checks all those boxes. So, yeah, thanks for stopping by and checking out my channel. Like, subscribe. If you have an idea for something you'd like to hear me talk about, the mental health components of it, and how I would apply my therapy background to a certain topic, it's easy with fictional characters, shows, movies, songs. Drop down in the comments and give me some ideas. Like I said, I got a list going of what I want to get to, but I'm happy to take other people's ideas and listen to it, and do those. So I like to interact with people. So thanks for stopping by and checking out the channel. Peace.